Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Derek.
Hello.
We are back after a short break. Sorry for the delay, but we've all been so extraordinarily busy that we couldn't even agree on a topic until we didn't have enough time to prep. Right when we got our shit together, though, Phil Elverum dropped his first album as the Microphones in 17 years called, fittingly, Microphones in 2020. And I seized on the opportunity to make these guys do an episode on a related album that I've been wanting to cover since we started this podcast, the Microphones' iconic 2001 LP, The Glow Part 2. Fear not, we're going to save some time to talk about Microphones in 2020, but I really want to dive deep into The Glow Part 2, and more importantly, to try to figure out why this album seems to keep rising in estimation when every other lo-fi indie folk album keeps falling from critical favor somehow. As always, I think it's best that we start with our previous experiences with the album. So, Dan, how much time have you spent with Phil Elverum in general, The Glow Part 2 specifically, and what do you think about all that?
You know, the Microphones and Phil Elverum, they're sort of a blunder for me. Like, I've listened to this album before. I first got it, like, you know, when I got into Elephant 6, you know, I was looking around, checking out the other, you know, lo-fi indie kind of stuff, and I got this, and it's basically been on like every iPod and Zune that I've ever had, and I've listened to it, you know, but I've never like dug deep. I've never come to love it. It's the only Microphones album I've ever listened to. And the only other Phil Elverum I've heard is the two Mount Erie records that we've covered on previous podcasts. So I'm kind of the newbie here. Wow,
for once. What about you, Darren?
Yeah, so you know, I came to know the Microphones during high school. It was sort of introduced, I feel like, as sort of one of the very first real like underground types of bands I had just never heard of. You know what I mean? Had never heard anything about. It just kind of seemed like, you know, where do they even come from? And upon like listening to The Glow Part 2, I kind of got a sense of like, I honestly didn't even think that this was like big enough to be published anywhere or like on like Pitchfork or anything. I just didn't, you know, it didn't seem that way. It kind of came out of left field, and that was just sort of how it was presented. But, you know, I pretty much instantly fell in love with it. You know, it was definitely during a time where, you know, I was into like writing music and stuff. So, you know, finding something that is like so lo-fi and so like, you know, seems like you could just do this in a bedroom or on your own, which is kind of like what we were doing, was like incredibly inspiring. You know what I mean? And it sort of has always sat in the back of my head. Like, I feel like I have like the idea of the album, and we'll get into this, I suppose. The idea of the album was like something way different than maybe the actual sound of the record. You know what I mean? Song wise. But I've always loved it. I've always come back to various parts of it over the years. What about you, Gabe?
Yeah, I have kind of like a complicated history with this album, as you remember, Darren.
Yeah.
Like when
you hated it.
When we were all getting into it, I had this like instinct, like this gut negative reaction.
Real bad. I remember.
It's something with me where like if I really hate something when I first hear it, like I'm either gonna hate it forever or I'm gonna like fall completely in love with it eventually. I don't know why. I think I talked about that with like the Captain Beefheart episode as well and stuff. But I think my problem was that like, and we'll talk about this obviously, but it's like the first three tracks are these like just absolute knockouts.
Right.
And then it like kind of drifts off into this weird, like, I felt like it was so hard to get all the way through the thing. And there were other songs I liked, and I was just like, why did he make this so difficult to fucking get through with like these little like, you know, just foghorn sounds like constantly going through the thing and, you know, whatever. And it wasn't until like quite a few years later that I finally kind of got into the whole thing, and I was like, you know, happily sitting through the entirety of My Warm Blood, the last track, you know.
Wow.
And so anyway, it was like a long process, but it is like a very long time favorite at this point for me. So having gotten that out of the way, I think we should try to describe just the overall sound of this record, and we'll kind of parse it out into all the different aspects of it. Maybe Dan, you can do the honors of describing it since you are a sort of new listener.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious, description for it is lo-fi. It definitely sounds like something just kind of made with what's around your house. Like obviously there's this guitar, drums, but even the drums sound very like amateurishly recorded. The like compression on it's like really bad and stuff. And there's sometimes just like instruments or whatever that just kind of sound like maybe they're toys, like I think it's a ukulele or something. There's something, I think it's on the Gleam, it sounds like what are steel drums or something, but like just sort of sounds like maybe like a toy steel drum or something like that. You're getting like a real DIY kind of feel here. It really does sort of like see, it really made me think of like Elephant Six, like not in a bad way, like he's ripping it off or something. Just like it really like brings those kind of like feelings to it. Like if you told me that this was a Elephant Six record, that was on the outskirts, I would believe you, if I didn't know about it. But
yeah, that's something I kind of want to like return to maybe a couple times here, because it's like, it does seem to come from the Elephant Six world, and yet to me there's something like very distinctively like Northwestern about it. Like it's kind of like a damp, like earthy quality like to it. I mean, yeah. I mean, so how would you describe the overall sound, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I get this like sense of like cool mountain air, kind of exactly what you were describing, outdoorsy sort of thing. There's also almost like a campfire type of vibe in some cases, right? So, songs that are just literally, Phil and a guitar,
right.
And, I feel like there's a lot of kind of like experimentation in a way with sound and different methods of recording, song by song, even like those first three that you mentioned, like they vary, in terms of like how they change, how other instruments enter in, where he places his voice. Sometimes you can hear him fairly well. Other times he's like literally mumbling under the music. You can't really understand what he's saying. You know what I mean? All of this stuff I feel like is like intentional. And, a lot of the album kind of deals with just sounds, a lot of like space and kind of like ambient noise throughout. And then almost whenever he feels like it, he comes in with a song with some lyrics and, sort of resets the tone and then goes off in a different direction. I mean, you go literally from like, I Felt Your Shape, which is just him and a guitar, to just this loud busting through like distorted guitar, song with Samurai Sword. I mean, it's kind of a wild trip in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's like, to me, the most striking thing about this is there are these huge extremes on this record where it's like the most blown out, distorted, like noise rock, basically. And then like the most sparse and tender, what you would call like indie folk kind of sound. It can often just sort of like change on a dime, but sometimes it's like, kind of a crazy combination of like the most Sun style, like droney guitars and stuff, just sort of layered into like this very delicate plucking. The other thing I think we got to mention is a lot of play with like, I guess like a lot of play with the stereo field here. A lot of play with like some of these acoustic guitars are, it's like some of the notes are on the right channel, some are on the left. There's often a bunch of like guitars that seem to be like harmonizing or playing just different pieces of a single, note or something.
Yeah, it makes
or
it
like
impossible
a single melody.
to try to like play by yourself, like on a guitar.
Yeah, so it's quite like, I mean, are there any other genres you would throw in here? I mean, people like to say, kind of like indie folk, lo-fi, with a touch of black metal or something. Is there anything else you guys would add there?
I don't know, but I definitely do get like the black metal, thing in it. The drums like very much give that, stuff like Mayhem and all that's like recorded, on a boombox or whatever. I couldn't think of the word. has that same sort of like really like compressed like kind of feel on the drums, and the cymbals like have this like really I guess kind of tinny quality, and you get that on this record a lot, especially like that samurai sword, that blast that hits you at the front and everything. But other genres, I mean, I think that kind of sums it up for me. What about you?
I mean, would either of you object to like emo as a genre a little bit?
I mean, in the sense that like the songs have emotional quality, but I don't think it doesn't make me think of like Midwest emo or anything like that really when I listen to it. I mean, I get why, especially like when this came out, I could see it getting kind of lumped in there. But
yeah,
to looking back,
early Modest Mouse has like that emo touch, that Midwest emo touch to it. I feel like something like the same thing going on here.
I guess maybe a little bit, but
Do you object, Darren?
No, I think I would agree. And I think a lot of the lyrics, though I think you can interpret them in different ways, can easily be seen as like you mentioned, like very tender or like emotional or like longing, searching, like the sort of things that I think you look for in, other emo songs that may be a bit more superficial, but still trying to deliver like some sort of, you know what I mean? Like sense of longing, I guess, is kind of what I think of.
Yeah. Okay, just trying to get an overview. I think we should zero in a little bit on the production, maybe first and foremost here. You guys, you both touched on it, but like the really interesting play with like mixing. I always think about like the song, God, what is it? My Roots Are Strong and Deep, where it's like extremely blown out, kind of tape distorted like piano. His double track vocals also very, very distorted in that way. And it's like the compression is so maxed out that it's really like warbling in your head. Like it kind of like fucks your head up. Like you would be like, wow, you put way too much compression on this, but it adds a lot to the track in some way, or like, I think you were sort of alluding to The Moon, Darren, where it's like this wall. I mean, it almost turns into a shoegaze song. Like,
oh yeah.
You have these kind of like plucky guitars, this kind of like, what is now kind of considered like a classic microphones thing, where it's like some of the plucks are in the left, some of the plucks are in the right. It's bouncing all over, and then it just gets overwhelmed by this wall of like shoegazy distorted organ and stuff. It sounds like the guitars are still going and are not on tempo with the song. You know what I mean? Like if you listen really closely, his vocals are so buried in there, like so soft and hushed. Did like the production and mixing kind of strike you like it did, me and Darren back in high school, Dan? Or do you feel like you've just heard maybe too much of this stuff at this point to be surprised?
No, I mean, I liked it. That's definitely like my favorite part of the record, I think. I'm kind of like an audio nerd, I like that kind of stuff. And really, I was thinking about like how he made this and how much work it would have been, because in 2001, doing it on the computer, you could probably do some of it on the computer, but like not nearly as like, well as you could today. So I don't know if he used like the standard lo-fi, Tascam 4-track or whatever, but just, I mean, to do those plucks in the different channels and every, like Darren said, when there's like multiple guitar, to do all this by yourself is like a lot of work. And I really would like to know, I would read a book on like, exactly what he did or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That would be like super interesting. So like really the production to me was like the most interesting part. I've always talked about like I don't really care about lyrics that much. So like things like that to me are like way more interesting, and just finding like the little tricks or whatever. I did read a little bit, like some of it he just like plugged a tape player like right into his guitar amp and stuff. Like that little like home tricks that you can do like that are it's like stuff I like to try to figure out, and it's just like such a cool thing to like use what you have available to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because we didn't talk about it, but it's like for me, I don't consider myself like a full blown Phil Elverum fan, just in the sense that I I love everything that I hear from him, and I even love like a couple weird ones that just I randomly happen to be listening to. But he has a lot of stuff that I just have not spent enough time with, and his sort of earlier like pre-Glow stuff. Like if you go way back, he's it seems like almost a project about recording. You know, like I think that's where the name The Microphones kind of comes from. Is like his obsession with actually recording equipment. You know, like how do you square that, Darren? Because it's like it's weird that he is still like. I don't even know how to ask this. It's like the album is as much about recording equipment as it is about his emotional devastation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I, even before, because we'll get into it with like the new Microphones in 2020, but, there's a lot revealed like in that song. But even before kind of hearing his sort of process and thinking about that, like I was always sort of amazed at how, and I think about this with a lot of artists, like the decision making, right, with songs and stuff when you're sequencing right. And like, why does he choose to bury his lyrics here? Why doesn't he have any lyrics there? Or why did I Felt Your Shape end up just being him and a guitar? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's always like so fascinating. And like, I just got the idea or like got the feeling that he just loved tinkering and trying different things. And, to him, it's like, well, I guess to everyone it would be like creating art, but it's just, it's just something where it's like he's just experimenting with a lot of things. And like, he's not approaching this with the sense of like, I've got to make sure I've got lyrics, I got to have a verse and a chorus or anything like with any sort of structure. It just kind of happens, you know what I mean? And
yeah, it has that sound, I think. And it's like, to me, this is like almost the central question that I really want to ask you guys is like, when you listen to this album, do you think like that kind of ramshackle off the cuff indie try anything quality, or do you hear like perfectionism, like a tinkerer to the highest degree? You know what I mean? Like, no, isn't it weird how you kind of hear both here?
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. I think a lot of it is like the tinkering thing, and like, when you say like the drums are blown out or whatever, like it very much seems like a choice, like he wanted it to sound that way. It never seems like, oh, he just fucked up and said, whatever, leave it. It like really never feels like that. It just kind of feels like it really like kind of it seems like somebody who's got like all these ideas in his head, a limited budget, and like being able to like express those ideas like with whatever is around, like, maybe he wanted like, real, harsh, big boom and drums or something, but like, that's a very hard thing to like mic up and everything. So, you go with the compression thing and it sounds real cool, you get something else. And, the distortion from a cassette tape player, like I think I read that it was like just one from the thrift store, like
right.
It's that like, I don't know, it never feels like haphazard. It always feels like even the, quote unquote, mistakes, feel like intentional,
Yeah. I wonder what you think, Darren, because it's like, you hear the acoustic guitars on The Moon or on I Felt Your Shape, right? It's like he could have probably done a better take, I think, because there's like so much buzzing and like bum notes and stuff on the acoustic guitar, and it's like, you know what I mean? Is that like exactly how he liked it, or is he like, where on the spectrum of ramshackle and perfectionist is he?
Yeah, I think he leans closer to perfection, right? And, I think this is something that I find kind of unique about this album being a lo-fi album, that I really enjoy it more on headphones. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's got a real headphone experience to it when you're listening to it. It doesn't work quite as well, I feel like, if you're in the car or just kind of listening out loud on speakers, you know what I mean? I mean, it's fine, but it's cool to listen with headphones on. And sometimes lo-fi, it doesn't really matter because you're not dealing with somebody who is tinkering and making very specific choices about what goes in this channel and that channel. So, listening to it on headphones is like, it's like listening to the Beatles' White Album and listening for all the extra sounds and stuff that's usually difficult to hear otherwise. That's one of my personal favorite things about this record.
I completely agree. I mean, the being at home, with COVID and everything, like working from home, I mostly have just been listening to music like on a little like speaker that I have. I really haven't been using headphones that much. So I started out like listening that way. We like drove around, for fun or whatever, and I listened to it in the car. But then, I finally like got around to listening outside in the yard. I almost took my shirt off, and I wore headphones, and I like really like. You could see those like panning things like so much more, and then from that point on, I like exclusively only listened to it in headphones, and I kind of like wish I had realized that earlier on,
Yeah. So, and I'm kind of curious actually, like, was there? It was just random, like you put it on headphones and you're like, wow, look at all this going on, or was there something about it that you were like, I should try this with headphones?
Oh no, just like literally, I was edging my yard, and so I was
with your shirt off.
Yeah. I actually had
put
my
on some microphones and edge.
Yeah,
yeah.
Doing a little yard work,
little edging. Yeah. Well, so I was going to ask actually because Pitchfork in their 2001 review, and by the way, this is kind of a funny anecdote. In 2001, they reviewed this album. They actually made it their album of the year back when they had like just 20 albums of the year that they did in 2001. It got a 9.2. Then in 2008, for this like reissue with bonus tracks, it got a 9.3. So there's evidence that it's just climbing and climbing. You know what I mean? Just like I said at the top. But in the 2001 review, the reviewer wrote, hearing the record on regular speakers is like staring at the Grand Canyon through a Viewmaster. And a lot of people call this like the ultimate headphone album. It sounds like you might agree, Darren, but do you feel like if you don't listen to this in headphones, you're really not even hearing it?
Yeah, and I'll give you a perfect like example of that. Like I had a buddy of mine in the car when I was listening to this record, and we were listening to, I believe it was I think it was The Glow, where it has that like distorted drum sequence there towards the end, right? And he's like, "What is wrong with your speakers? Like, it sounds horrible." You know what I mean? And I'm like, "Yeah, it doesn't sound great, or it doesn't sound as dramatic, I think, coming through speakers. But when you have headphones on and you can really just kind of hear everything happening in the build up to that moment, it's definitely a different experience."
Yeah, I think you're talking about the end of "I Want Wind to Blow."
Yeah,
right?
maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I was having this kind of like feeling like probably most of the time in my life until this time, I was listening to this album like predominantly on like, iPod headphones or something. And so this is like the first time that I was really listening like with nice headphones and everything. And it was like, I almost felt like it worked better on the iPod headphones because like the distortion just blew up like the whole track, like just completely overwhelmed it, and had kind of like an interesting effect in that way. Now it's like I can actually hear everything like really clearly, and that's just one instrument in the mix is the blown out drums. But okay, I want to kind of return to that, but another question I have is like when you hear the use of lo-fi on this album, like, do you think pragmatism, like I always admire these artists like, like Elliott Smith or something, where it's like he's kind of like he doesn't want to record in lo-fi, it's just that he has to. And he's like doing the absolute most he can with what he's got. You know what I mean? He's like pushing on the very limits of what can be done with like a 4-track tape recorder or something. And then, you see as he like gets, he gets like more successful, he leaves it right behind, the whole lo-fi thing. Do you listen to this album and think that like, this is a guy who's got limited means and he's doing everything he possibly can with it? Or do you hear it more like, this is a guy who likes the sound of lo-fi and he could have recorded it better. He knows a shit ton about recording, obviously, but he wanted these, sounds to be completely blown out sometimes, or he wanted the compression to go crazy here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of both, like I doubt he had the budget to, record at Abbey Road or something, but, I think you're right. He seems like he knows enough about it to not blow the drums out and stuff. But I think when he does it, it's definitely like he wants to, but it's also, I think, a lot of, just using what you have. Like I said earlier, like some of those like kind of, toy sounding instruments that get used, maybe he would have wanted I don't know, some strings or or orchestral things or so, in his mind, but like he doesn't have access to that kind of stuff. So you get that like sort of pragmatic thing. I don't know, like lo-fi and this record, like in general, like it gives me like a lot of like feelings like folk art does. It's like these people that like they have these ideas. They're not always the best trained or don't have the like most equipment or whatever, but it just, they got to get it out. It's got to pour out, and so you make do with what you have, and I like feel that a lot here.
Yeah, I always like, this is something I struggle with. Maybe you remember this, Darren, me complaining about this, but when I first heard this album, I felt like he was, not like authentic lo-fi that I had already come to kind of love at that time, where it sounded like a choice to me. And for some reason, I had a problem with that.
I remember you arguing about that quite a bit, yeah.
I always thought about like, in the Glow Part 2, the title track, when he like does this really long, like, he's like yelling kind of, and it's like, the mic is distorting. And I would think about that in comparison to Two-Headed Boy by Neutral Milk Hotel. And there's a point where he also yells and it distorts. And for some reason, when I listened to that, I thought that was such a great take that even though it distorted, they had to keep it, Whereas the Microphones guy turned the gain up so that it would distort when he did this. And for some reason I had a problem with that, but you know what I mean, Darren? Like when you listen to this, do you think like these are all choices or he is working with limited means?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely choice here, right? I mean, come on, we were in a band. We had like somewhat limited access to go to a local studio if we really wanted to. And I'm sure that somebody like Phil could have, if he wanted to, get himself into a studio or fix himself up with what he needed to at least record something slightly better. But, I think part of like the approach in making these choices, and we talk about this all the time when we compare albums that have that like studio sheen, you know what I mean? Like there's something that's a little more genuine, a little more realistic about, not trying to use like the highest, budgeted studio or equipment or whatever. And I mean, sure, like there's definitely clear choices that like, he wanted it to sound distorted, right? Or he probably took multiple takes and was like, it's not distorted enough. I want more, or something like that,
Right.
But that's, that's like it's like a choice, but I don't feel like it's, disingenuine, like by doing something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, what do you think, Dan? Do you have like any ethical problem with that?
Like if it was somebody like, I don't know, someone real
Taylor
famous.
Swift.
Yeah, if Taylor Swift was like, oh, I'm going to make a Tascam 4-track record, I'd be like, okay, you're like a literal millionaire. And like, then, yeah, I have a problem with it. But it's like, could Phil have maybe gone to like, a half-ass studio or something? Like, sure. But I don't think there's a even if you like Darren said, like if he does this take, he's like, not enough distortion. Whereas like, right. I mean, you brought up Two-Headed Boy, like that song Two-Headed Boy Part 2, that is literally the first take like of that song, because it is like so great. If you turn it up really loud at the end, you can hear Scott say, holy shit, because it was so crazy. But like I don't think it's like I don't think there's like a disingenuousness about like, doing it again if you didn't get enough distortion and you wanted that, like I mean, is it any different when if you like play guitar through a distortion pedal, but it like wasn't quite, is that really any different if it's like tape distortion or a pedal doing it? I think as long as like it's not somebody like I can't think of the word, but like taking on the genre that is completely
appropriating.
Yeah, that's
exactly
what it was.
That's a good
one. Exactly. Like I said, if it was Lady Gaga doing it or Taylor Swift or something, like, get fucked. But I'll allow this guy.
I don't know. It kind of baffles me to like think back about my reaction, because I don't feel that way at all anymore. I feel like, wow, this is so creative, because I too love the sound of lo-fi music. I think it's like that like weird, tape distortion, all the tape hiss and stuff that's on here, like the little pops and like it's almost like a, what's that, ASMR? I can never remember the order of the initials, but sometimes he's like so close, it's like popping and stuff. And like, now I just like so admire that he was just like, so this is like the language of lo-fi, and I'm just going to use it for my own purposes. And it's like, yeah, that's fucking cool. And yet I would also draw the line somewhere, like at Taylor Swift making a lo-fi record. For some reason, that would annoy me. Would that annoy you, Darren?
Yeah, probably, because, just like you guys mentioned, I mean, it just would not feel genuine at all. You know what I mean? In fact, I feel like she would still be in like a really fancy studio, just purposely trying to like put a filter over thing. You know what I mean? It wouldn't feel the same way. Like part of like what, the charm of like the microphones or like Neutral Milk Hotel is the idea that like they're just like in a house or just a bedroom somewhere, or like, you imagine like cables and stuff everywhere. Like I could never imagine like Taylor Swift doing something like that,
Yeah, I don't know, I gotta do some like further soul searching about this, because it seems kind of hypocritical why it's cool that Phil Elverum just like did whatever he wanted with the lo-fi sound, and I would have a problem with like some rich person doing it. So all this stuff, like this production stuff, and we're going to dive into the lyrics and more about the individual songs and stuff, but like to me, like you said, Dan, I think the production and the mixing and stuff is like the most mind-blowingly creative part of this album. And what do you guys think it contributes to the album? Like, why did he split up guitar riffs into like, two channels all the time? And why did he, why is he burying his voice sometimes? I mean, like, what does all this do to it?
I mean, I think like why he did it and stuff is that tinkering, thing we talked about. Like, I think it's just like things like that just sort of seem like a guy who likes playing with that kind of stuff, and then it happens to sound good. I don't know if there's like some grand, design in it or whatnot. I guess
I'm trying to, it's like maybe a leading question, but it's like a lot of people describe it as like somehow world building or something, it's like, people write stuff like, and I'm tempted to do the same, where it's like, oh, these guitars all over, bouncing all back and forth around my head. It feels like I'm in like thick branches myself, like going through the forest, or, like,
I could see that.
Does it feel like this maniacal tinkerer just happened to make like a bunch of like nice indie folk songs, and you've got those two worlds? Or does it feel like, all one piece to you? Like this actually is important to the whole experience?
Oh, I mean, it definitely feels like one cohesive like experience. I don't know if that's like, by intentional design, like when he started out, or if it just, was stumbled upon or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think it does give it like a grand cohesion.
What do you think? What does it contribute, Darren?
I mean, I think it's central to the record. Just alongside all of the sounds, the tinkering, the recording, everything we've been talking about up to this point, you know what I mean? I just get this real sense that, there's a feeling that he's after, and he might start with that musically, and then he writes lyrics or comes up with lyrics to kind of go along with that. But then there's definitely a focus on how do you deliver those lyrics, like, do I put myself front and center here, or do I bury it? And is there meaning behind that? And it changes your focus as a listener, and to me, it's like, you mentioned like the language of lo-fi, and I really like that analogy, because, it's like taking something that you're aware of, or even taking, a bunch of colors to paint with and doing different things with them. You know what I mean? Maybe you're putting in a certain color and you're masking that color for some reason. Like there's usually something behind all of that. And it's hard to describe, a visual piece, or it's easier to describe a visual piece, I think, than like the way we're trying to describe just music. But I feel like the same thing is happening, right? Like he's deliberately choosing on the moon that he's going to bury the lyrics here. And, he wants the listener either to seek out what those lyrics are, or just kind of understand that maybe it's not so much about the lyrics, it's about the feeling of the music.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just feel like when I listen to this album, it's like the sound, like the sonic qualities are equally, if not more important than the like lyrical themes and stuff. But, I can never quite figure it out why that is. It just feels like the album is just as much about like sonic, building these like weird soundscapes. I mean, it even goes into like a weird little drone section we'll talk about. I also think about, as we kind of transition into the lyrics and stuff, there are parts of this album that I think make like more sonic sense than thematic sense, because doesn't it feel like we kind of enter this like sort of dark little stretch here, and it's like kind of weird that I'll Not Contain You is like right in the middle of that, you know? It's kind of like a nice, pretty acoustic thing. And it's almost got like a sort of uplifting, you know, you just like, if you're listening the first time, you just kind of feel like, oh, okay, we're emerging out of the other side of that. And then we go to the Gleam and it's like, dun, 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 dun. You know, it's like, oh shit, he's still depressed. So sometimes I feel like it's just like, you know what? This isn't like the exact mood thematically, but for this sound world to work, I need to like switch from overwhelming blown out drone track into this soft little acoustic thing, you know, for some reason. So let's talk about those lyrical themes. Maybe Darren, you can do the honors here. How would you describe the stuff he's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's always sort of been a mystery to me. You know, I think early on I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the specific lyrics, you know, but I keep coming back to The Moon because that was really one that I was like, you know, I really just did not understand what was being said. And got more and more curious. And it was one of the earliest ones that I was like, all right, let me look up the lyrics and kind of see and everything. And, you know, it's kind of hard to describe. I feel like even now to this day, I don't necessarily feel like I get it, or like I'm on the inside and I know what exactly is going on here, you know. It's so much more about like just feelings and like how I sort of feel as I'm listening to the music and like what I'm sort of interpreting from how he is singing, right? And like a sense of longing, or like, you know, the way he like looks at the moon and like talks about like a relationship. Like it does, like you mentioned depression, like I definitely get that sense too, but I mean, Phil has written much more depressing stuff than this.
Well, you know, I guess I'm kind of surprised because I too spent like years just never looking up the lyrics of this album and just like had this kind of overwhelming like just experience of like the feeling. And then it was really like this week was the first time that I'd like read, you know, did a couple like read alongs, like just reading every lyric and stuff. And it really seems to me, I wonder what you think, Dan, that like almost every song is about a breakup. And he's like 20, he's in his early 20s, very early 20s when he's writing this. And, you know, I get it. I remember that headspace, but like a pretty traumatic breakup. And so like something like The Moon, I guess I was just surprised because, you know, I would normally listen and so much of it is buried and I would just catch little lines here and there. And I'm like, oh, he's thinking about the universe and stuff. But then I'm like reading the lyrics and it seems like he's basically just going to different places where him and his girlfriend had been together and trying to like make a new memory of being there alone so that the old memories don't bother him or something. I was just sort of surprised, like how did you get this, Dan? Like how like it's kind of just a breakup album?
Yeah, I mean, luckily like a lot of the lyrics are buried and stuff because like I said, you know, I wasn't as familiar with the record, so the first like week or so I spent with it. I didn't look up the lyrics. I just listened and grabbed what I grabbed. But then I did what you did. I did some read-alongs on the old Genius and whatnot. And yeah, I liked it better when I didn't 100%. You know, like know what he was talking about because yeah, it does just sort of become like a little breakup thing. And you know, it sort of made me think, we've talked about it before, like some records like maybe you don't enjoy because you didn't, you know, hit them at the right spot. And it's like, you know, I'm 30 and married and, you know, a breakup album isn't like really, you know, what headspace I'm in, you know, or anything. So I was sort of like glad to not catch them, you know, without trying to, you know.
I mean, to me, it was like this is like a guy deep in the throes of a breakup at age 20 or something. And he is very, very articulate and like writes beautifully. But what he's describing to me are like feelings that only like people in their early 20s have. Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, I wonder what you think, Darren. There is a lot of like just general, like even if it was inspired by a breakup, there's a lot of like existential soul searching and like feeling like disconnected from the world around him or something, you know, recognizing that, you know, he's like, you know, like I felt my size. He's like trying to think about I don't know, think about himself as like a planet or something, like some huge celestial object that like matters or something, and he just can't stop thinking about like how insignificant he is. So, I mean, do you feel, Darren, like this is the kind of album you got to listen to in your early 20s, or do you feel like there's a lot here that, you know what I mean, that kind of goes beyond that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like it goes beyond that, though. You know what I mean? Like, even looking at the lyrics, like, I'll take one song in particular, like I Felt Your Shape. Like, that's just probably my favorite song on the record, which is just crazy because it's just him and a guitar, but it's just one that I've just kind of always loved for a very long time. And again, I mean, this is like more or less talking about a girlfriend or talking about some sort of relationship and how he felt about this person or how he hung around them like independently, but they weren't really there. You know, like it's not like blatant, like sappy to me. You know what I mean? He seems to inject some level of poetry, you know, soul searching, like he had mentioned before. And it's very much like being like on the inside of somebody's head. You know what I mean? Like kind of like hearing them internalize these feelings in a way. And sometimes it's really difficult. I'm kind of just thinking to myself about like what it takes to try to write lyrics. Like it's really difficult, right? To like express yourself, but not do it in such a blatant, obvious, cringy way. Right. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like he seems to balance that fairly well on a lot of the album.
Yeah, I feel like I was just kind of like wondering as I was reading the lyrics, I was like, why isn't this cringy to me? And I was thinking, like, is it because I came to like it when I was in my early 20s? And I certainly, you know, I certainly related to some of the subject matter here back then. But now I almost think of it kind of like one of these recent Mount Erie albums where it's like, this is Phil Elverum describing his headspace at age 21 or whatever. And I am just like listening to a story written by this guy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not cringy because he's not like, oh, this is what it feels like when you get broken up with. He's like, I thought about this. I felt this, you know? And I'm just like, okay, I'm reading this very troubled guy.
Yeah, he like questions himself. The end of I Felt Your Shape is like, I don't know, my nights are cold and I remember a warmth and I could have sworn I wasn't alone. Like, and it just ends on that thought, like of just sort of being unsure of things. And to me, it's so much easier to connect with someone who is admitting that they really don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, does that help it for you at all, Dan? Like to think of, like, have a little distance, you know, like you're kind of just reading a story by this guy?
No, exactly. Because, you know, this, I wish I could think of like a good example, you know, but it's not like something that is, you know, like so blatantly, you know, kind of, I don't know, childish or you know, teenager, you know, sort of lyric. It is like sort of well written, and yeah, it just sounds like it's like an actual, you know, story or feeling. And like, yeah, he was early 20s or whatever when he did it, and you know, like, I mean, yeah, I can remember feeling, you know, that way and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's definitely like the way it's written. I really wish I could think of like a bad example of something.
Well, I was thinking about, like, for some reason, Modest Mouse, right? We talked about like a Modest Mouse record not that long ago, and I was talking about how like Modest Mouse was the deepest shit ever to me when I was younger. like blew my mind. And I was trying to think like, well, what's the difference? Because now like some of his like ponderings about the world and the universe and stuff like kind of you know, are a little cringy to me now. And you know, it seems like in Modest Mouse songs, he'll just be like, oh, the universe works this way. Like the stars are just projectors.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like there's like a definition to it.
Yeah. And at the time I was like, wow, they really are just projectors. So like if I stop agreeing that stars are projectors, yeah, it loses the force for me. You know what I mean? Like,
sounds like you're describing a religion or something here.
Yeah. But like, yeah, if I just like, if I am not in his same headspace, it no longer works. Whereas here, it's like, I can just be like, this is his headspace. I always know it's his headspace.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just feel like I'm at a bar or something and there's some like, you know, just destroyed 21-year-old, like pouring his heart out to me. And I'm like, damn, dude, that sucks, man. I remember that, but it'll get better. But like, for some reason, it doesn't like cringe me out. I thought it was like really interesting and might explain, which we'll talk about, like why, you know, its reputation continues to grow. I also want to ask about the sequencing here. You know, you guys kind of mentioned that it is cohesive. Do you have any temptation to say that it's, you know, like a little samey, the album?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think that is like a criticism I have with it is like the length. You know, it's an hour and 6 minutes, and there's not that much diversity here. You know, like while each individual song, you know, he's using different stuff. The recording techniques can be different. It's still like, you know, like we talked about earlier, you know, it's basically all from the same palette. You know, it is like sort of a world building album, and I kind of feel like for a little bit you're in this world a little too long. There's definitely like things that I would cut. I think it could be knocked down quite an amount.
Interesting. Yeah, by the time I got like fully into it in my early 20s, of course, I, you know, loved every second of it, basically. And this week I found myself a little surprised. I was feeling like, damn, this record feels like even longer than an hour and 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you think about, because it's like a criticism I just, like one of the main ones I read is that it is a little samey. Do you agree or disagree, Darren?
You know, I kind of sort of agree, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I like this world. I don't feel tired of it. You know, by the time you get to the end, I feel like, you know, I like it, right? I like where I'm at, but I do agree that the middle section, you know, can be a bit of a struggle. You know what I mean? Like, just in terms of like how quickly things change. And so often I feel like I don't even know where I'm at in the album until, you know, another song, I'll Not Contain You, comes on to kind of remind me a little bit of where I'm at, and then like I felt my size, like, okay, now I know I'm like getting closer to the end here. And that, you know, that's been my biggest problem with the record for a long time. I remember, you know, at the top of this, I sort of described that like the idea of this record, like thinking about this record, like I'm like, this is a 10, like it's just a 10 in my mind because of all the stuff we've described up to this point. But actually listening to the whole record, you know, track by track all the way through, like there are just parts of the album that I'm just like, I could do without. That's just it.
Yeah, I think it's really strangely sequenced, honestly, because you start off with these three juggernauts, and I know I'm not the only one in the world that like it took a long time to get past these three songs.
Oh yeah,
like they're the three like most fleshed out, like most composed, like most inventive songs. Like they're all just like masterpieces.
Right.
And then it, you know, I think like Headless Horseman and My Roots Are Strong and Deep are like great songs, but it just kind of settles into this territory where it gets into like an almost ambient drone album for a little while. You know, something like The Mansion is like, you know, just these like non-tempoed strummings, you know, and him just kind of like singing over the top of it, like he, you know, the vocal could be sung over any, you know, any strumming chords or something, you know, and it's just like very drifting, very ambient. And then I think it's so strange that we kind of like emerge out of this like quite long, very dark, like often instrumental droney thing into like, when you get to You'll Be in the Air, you got like 8 just fucking slappers in a row. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, I always think like when I'm listening to this album, I start to like check. I'm like, damn, which something am I on? Like, God, this is really taking on forever. And then I look and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty close to You'll Be in the Air. And then it's just like, you know, 2-minute track, 2-minute track, 2-minute track, like all great. I think it's a little weird. Like, what do you make of that, Dan? Like, what is up with like this? What, like 1/3 of the way into the album, it comes to a grinding halt, and if you can get through that, you get a bunch of snappy little tracks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can like understand like the you know, sort of droney instrumental thing, you know, like maybe that is part of that world building, but it's in a bad spot, you know, like it's too early to throw you into that. And I mean, really that section is like too long. I just think like we don't need both somethings. and the instrumental, I mean, especially so close together, because I mean, I think there's good like moments in it. Like I really like individually the song "The Gleam" Part 2.
Yeah,
like it's like a swan song, just that like downbeat kind of thing.
But isn't it kind of weird, like how the first Something has like this kind of like cello-y sound, and it is the melody from The Gleam, and you think like, oh, we're in concept album territory, where it's like it comes back like in full form, but it comes back like 3 songs later. Isn't that weird?
No, exactly. And then there's just like the other instrumental track is like way at the end. It's
yeah.
I don't know. It is a weird, like I would basically chop that section down quite a bit if I was president.
I mean, would you like touch anything, Darren? Or you feel like this is just,
well,
let's not mess with it?
I mean, I probably wouldn't want to mess with it. I would love, maybe some more information. Maybe there's information out there that exists where he maybe explains some of the decision making behind the sequencing and everything. Because I do think that if you suddenly start chopping things away, maybe that feeling of like when you get to "You'll Be in the Air" will not be as impactful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you chop down that middle section and you go from like those first 3, or even "My Roots Are Deep," and just jump into another song, maybe they lose a little bit of that impact. So I have a hard time thinking about really cutting things other than maybe like shortening things. Maybe that would be something I would consider.
I just feel like it's almost like the first half is like a Pansonic record or something, like an indie folk record that slowly turns into just a drone album or something. And then like for some reason we pop out the other side with "You'll Be in the Air," and we're back in like kind of the indie folk, touches of noise rock territory for a while. It's just weird. It feels like the end of the album, and then we're like kind of continuing on to some other like postscript or something. And yet I will say, and I wonder if you guys feel the same, that I think my favorite part of the whole album is the transition from "I Felt Your Shape" into "Samurai Sword." You mentioned this earlier, Darren, but like it's the most tender, like the most beautiful track here. It's the only one you can like really imagine, like, I don't know, Iron and Wine or like one of these indie folkers, playing it or whatever. And then it just fucking rips your head off. Yeah. And like lyrically also, it's interesting because it just feels like a couple points here. He's like pretty depressed about this breakup and stuff, and he's trying to relate to things. He's, this and that. He's trying to find other ways out of it. And it's like, it just seems almost like he comes to a little understanding on I Felt Your Shape or something. It's still a little bit of a sad song, but it's like a little bit more, just a little bit, he's getting it or something. Like, I didn't really know you, like you had your own things going on or something.
Yeah.
And then Samurai Sword is like this metaphor about a bear waiting to fucking kill him while he's like hiding in a tree, and he falls out. And then My Warm Blood is about him, like, he finally got what he wanted, which is that this bear ripped him to fucking shreds, and now like bugs are eating his blood, and he'll finally be part of nature, and it's like the most shockingly dark ending. You know what I mean? It's like, just, I'm like, all right, you're getting there. I felt your shape. That's nice. Boom! Like he's fucking having suicidal fantasies. What do you guys make of that ending? Do you love that as much as I do?
Yeah, I liked it. It really like kind of, I don't want to say it's funny, but it's an unexpected like ending. Like it I think it makes it special in the sense that it's like, you sort of either expect him to like stay depressed or like, come out of it, and he's like, I didn't need her or something, but like you don't expect him to be eaten by a bear.
Right. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty dramatic. And I think it's an interesting way to end it. It seems very Phil-like to kind of go there. He sort of loves telling stories kind of like that,
yeah.
And so I absolutely love I Felt Your Shape. I love the sort of question that it leaves you with, but I do love the fact that like we sort of get like an answer, or we at least get like a clear ending here. Like Dan, you sort of mentioned, it could have gone really well, really swell right off into the sunset kind of thing, or it could end in like brutal, death, which is kind of what it did. So
yeah, it's just like, God, I'm trying to get through this. I even feel like in The Gleam, it's like, marching on, like this kind of, it's like a funeral march, but it's also a little bit like, I'm going to climb this mountain and all this shit. And then it's like, you know what, fuck it, I just want to kill myself. I don't know why I like it so much. And you could kind of imagine like a different version of this album that ends with "I Want Wind to Blow" or something, you know, with that like nice melody kind of riding along, and then it just ends with him like, "And the wind did blow," you know, or something like really shitty. But I like that it ends really darkly. But the thing, though, I should mention before we get added to death is that it kind of does end with "I Want Wind to Blow," because you can hear it like very faintly under the heartbeat of his dying corpse as he's being devoured by bugs. What, on that note, what do you guys make of like the unifying thing here, which is this like, I don't know what to describe it. I call it the foghorn, because he said it was inspired by the foghorn sound you can hear during Twin Peaks at Pete's house specifically. You know what I'm talking about, Dan?
Yeah.
Like, there's just like that horn sound going all the time. And he compared it to that. I think it sounds a little synthetic, though. You know what I mean? It doesn't like sound like a field recording of a horn. It sounds like a dull electronic sound or something. I mean, how would you even describe that? And why is it running through the whole album?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It doesn't like sound specifically like a field recording or anything. As to why, I don't know. I mean, maybe like that was his, thread to make it a concept record or something. I'm not sure.
What do you have any explanation? Theory?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought of it like I kind of imagine it as that's the representation of like the glow, like a glow, but like the sound.
Wow, that's good.
That's pretty easy, right? You remember those, those like little ball things that have like electricity, going out like all around
yeah,
it,
yeah.
Usually look at it.
I have one of those on my amp.
And like the sound that's usually played to sort of represent that sort of movement. That's what I always think of when I hear that. Like it's just like some zapping, like electricity or something. It's weird.
Yeah.
Very Twin Peaks.
My sort of theory that is, it's just, whatever, like it's no better or no worse than anybody else's, but is that like, I do kind of think of it like a foghorn or something, and it just kind of like makes me think of the real world or something. He's got this like huge, emotional storm going on inside of him, and it's just like every once in a while you're like, oh, this is a guy like standing in the woods, and there's like logging factory like nearby, you know what I mean? Like it just kind of like it just seems to contrast like this just quiet, and there's like it's like tape hiss, but it almost sounds to me like passing cars maybe or something. And it's like, it's just like when you snap out of it, you're like, damn, I was having like a moment there, and I'm just a guy in the woods actually. I don't know, I just feel like that almost works with the theme here, is like that he is having like this whole inner world that is like totally disconnected from the kind of boring mundane world that's around him. I forgot to ask, would you guys call it a concept album? I mean, I feel like it's a concept album. It's not exactly like a full story, but would you guys describe it as a concept album?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a cohesion enough. So, like it's at least like one of those world building albums. And I think like you could pretty much give that the concept album title if you want,
Well, what do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly linear in the sense that like the theme kind of persists throughout. There's definitely albums out there where we listen to from one track to the next, and it's like, yeah, this is just self-contained tracks, laid next to each other, and that's not at all what this is. From like "I Want Wind to Blow" to "My Warm Blood," like I feel like they're all related, very close to one another. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess most people do describe it as a concept album, and I think in the sense of like it all has like very similar and connected thematic material. It definitely is, but it's just a little surprising that it's like it's not like a grand story or anything. It's just like sad, a little bit better. Nope, sad, kills self. Like that's the dramatic arc there. But it is all kind of like of a piece. Any other highlights that we maybe did talk about already or didn't talk about? Anything you want to single out as like a real highlight in this record, Dan?
I mean, like I said, I think like it's weird to say because it's the section I was like complaining about the most, but I really do like the Gleam part 2 as like its own thing. Like that's maybe my like favorite like song on its own. I don't think it works like well where it is, but I like that. I mean, those first couple tracks, like you guys were saying, it was sort of hard the first handful of times I was listening to it to like move past that, you know, and all. But yeah, I don't think I have much else to add.
Yeah. What about you, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time kind of talking about, I feel like, the moon and like, I felt your shape, but like really, I Want Wind to Blow and The Glow Part 2 are just such phenomenal, like, they're just masterpieces. I feel just as excited listening to those tracks as I did the first time. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like I can just never get tired of them. Like, when the Glow crashes in and then he just, like, breaks out with the guitar and kind of, like, his voice sort of cracks. Yeah, he's taking his shirt off, his voice cracks. Like, it's just, it's like kind of like everything that I sort of wish. It's just one of those things where it's like, being somebody who enjoyed writing music back in the day, like, you just aspire to that. It's like, wow, this is everything I wish I could do, and it doesn't seem so hard to do. He makes it seem easy. It's like impossible. Like, there's no way I could ever match that,
It really does give you the feeling of like, I could do this, and it's actually really hard. But I remember being like hugely inspired by like I Want Wind to Blow, in the sense that, it's like this, it's basically like this beautiful, it's like two parts, and the first part is almost like there's literally a guitar just being like one note like the whole time, and the second part has this like really beautiful melody, and it's like just kind of doing the melody. It's like really lovely when it switches, and it's like, how should I end this? Like, I want it to end big. I'll just keep doing this part, but way louder. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not like Godspeed or something. You got to like compose like some, and it just felt like liberating to me to hear that. Like, oh shit! Like, if you just like, sometimes just two parts is enough for a song, and like sometimes the big crescendo is just add some like completely blown out drums to the thing you were already playing, and that works just as well as trying to write some like, big emotional payoff or something. Like, the emotional payoff is just the same thing but just bigger or something. You know what I mean? It's like, and different tracks like God, what is it? I Felt My Size in particular, where it's just like, there's a part where this kind of weird, like very Elephant Six style, like singing saw sound kind of comes in, like wee 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 wee, and it gets overwhelmed by this droney distortion. Then the drums and everything disappear, and it's just a drone. And then the drone gives way to like just clean piano chords. It's like changing every bar, and I was just so like, damn, maybe you don't like have to choose. Like, if you've got like 5 good ideas, just do them like one after another. Maybe it'll work. I just like was really inspired by that. I also wanted to highlight just real quick, maybe my favorite song is I Want to Be Cold, which is just such a masterpiece in the sense of like, it's a total noise rock track, like very Sonic Youth or something. Yeah. Very soft vocal. And then I just love how like everything drops out and it's just like a little strummed acoustic guitar, like, again, such a like inventive song structure, I think, that really blew my mind back then, but still sounds fresh. Any other like kind of lowlights or anything? I mean, outside of just that kind of droney stretch, any lowlights for either of you guys?
No, I think that's really the only like thing I would change. I think everything else is, pretty good, at least.
I mean, I don't think there's much to like really complain about like in an entire song. I mean, I think there's something charming and interesting just about for everything on here, even those instrumental tracks. But just thinking about it as in totality, it's a bit, some of it's a bit difficult. And My Warm Blood, I mean, once you get past the main part of the song, I mean, Gabe, I'm really interested in hearing why you love all of that and continue to listen to all of it. But
well, I think it was that time in my life I was like, just feeling this so much that I was like
imagining yourself just being eaten.
I'm just dying. My blood is pumping for the last time, and like for some reason I'm hearing myself sing I Want Wind to Blow like really in the background, like in my dying thoughts. I don't know how to justify it anymore, to be quite honest. It's like I pretty much rarely listen through the whole thing, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I love that first part, it's like I think a great ending. but it feels to me like the end of On Avery Island, which we talked about in a previous episode, I love that effect. I love the transition into that like huge crazy drone thing. I'll listen to it for like 3 minutes and then I'm not going to finish it. You know what I mean?
Right.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. It really reminded me of Pre-Sisters swallowing a donkey's eye. And at first, I was like sort of pissed off about this, My Warm Blood on here, like ending that way. But then I thought, and I remembered when we did that, Avery, I was like, I was pro Pre-Sisters, so I'm gonna be pro. I'm gonna be pro.
Gotta
My
be
Warm
consistent. Consistent messaging.
Yeah,
here.
exactly. At least it's at the end, If you, and the same thing with Pre-Sisters, like if you don't want to sit through it, you don't have to. It's just for the people who want to be there. So if that was in the middle of the record,
you're walking to your car.
Yeah, exactly. Like if that was in the middle, I would say horrible decision. But at least like you can bail whenever you feel like it. And like I was thinking, and I don't know if it is this way. I've never seen it, but like some records will have like the locked track, locked groove at the end. It'll go forever. Like it's cool. That would be like a cool effect on here, and like maybe that's sort of what he's playing at by it being so long. That it's sort of like it goes on forever.
Yeah, I don't know, because I like. I like Pre-Sisters more because I like the idea of Pre-Sisters, as we talked about. Which
Pre-Sisters is definitely like more composed,
But it's just like the thought of it. Like, okay, it ends with this massive drone that just sort of like slowly trails off and falls apart. It's like a cool way to end an album. Like, God, what's that band? Clipping. I like that the album ends with 17 minutes of a piano just burning. I'm never going to listen all the way through it, but I really like that idea. This idea here, I can't say I like as much, just like occasionally heartbeat sounds, that foghorn going. I want to be consistent, speaking of consistency, where I complained a lot about the Billie Eilish album and how it's like the laziest thing ever to like add coherence to your record by ending the song with like little clips of all of the songs or something, remember this song, and so I don't actually like love that you can like hear faintly like little bits of I Want Wind to Blow and like some other things just kind of underneath this heartbeat. It's a little unnecessary, I guess, if I'm just being totally honest. So before we move on to, I've got other questions about like kind of just the big picture here, the legacy of this album, and stuff to say about microphones in 2020. But Dan, maybe you could sum up your opinion, or we all can, on The Glow Part 2. I mean, did you like this record? Did you love this record?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this was a record that I've tried to get into like throughout, my teenage years, and it never really stuck. And this time I was basically like forced to, like I had to like learn it. And it was like the first couple times I listened to it, you get through those first 3 tracks, and then it's just like. It kind of became a slog, but I did come to enjoy it. I don't think it's a record that I'll like, make it into my rotation or anything. It's not like I found some great big blunder that I'm now going to listen to all the time or anything. But, I will say, like, I enjoyed the record. I thought it was good. It's not some, big masterpiece to me or anything. But, I did come to enjoy it finally.
How would you rate it?
Yeah, and also I want to know, like, I mean, would you call it like a lo-fi classic or something like that at least?
I maybe like a minor. I could think of a bunch of stuff that I like better, but I'd give it like an 8. It's good.
Okay, tough customer. I want to gauge Darren. I mean, I want to know like how it sounds now in 2020. But would you call this album like the equal of In the Airplane Over the Sea? I think a lot of people talk about it that way. Do you feel that way, Darren?
Man, that's wow. I wasn't expecting that. I don't think so. I can't. No, I don't. I can't. Aeroplane to me is like is a perfect 10. You know what I mean? Like through and through. Every single song on there is a 10. Here, like we've talked about, there's some stuff that's just kind of like, I could do without, or maybe skip over, let me get on with it. But in my mind, like I mentioned, like the concept, the thought of the album has always been like, man, this is the 10, like it's so great. But then the actual listening experience, going through the whole thing, like there's just a little bit of like hiccups, I feel like, that I'm not as, in love with versus other parts of the actual album, if that makes sense. So for, but that being said, like this record is still a personal favorite of mine. And I think it always will be. The fact that it's kind of stuck with me all throughout the years and continues to like, it just, it's one of those albums that as you get older and have different experiences, you also have different experiences with some albums like this. You know what I mean? Like I listen to it differently now than I did back then. And that's, to me, that's a testament to the greatness of a record. So for me, this is like a 9.5. I mean, it's close to a 10. It's, it's just not quite a 10 for me, but I mean, still one of my favorite albums.
Yeah, I'm going to still give it a 10 because you know how I roll. But
of course, just toss them out. If you like something a little bit, it's getting a 10.
I do feel very strongly that this is like the definitive, like indie lo-fi album. Like everybody who's done home recording, and that was very popular at that time, like the kind of home recording thing, like experimenting with lo-fi, like studio as instrument in the indie world. Like I feel like this is the album that's gonna be remembered as like summing up that era, and it has kind of influenced every other artist that's doing that same kind of like just me in the middle of the night tinkering ever since. So like it has like its place, I think, in musical history. But I was a little surprised spending so much time with it this week after not having spent as much time with it. I listen every once in a while, but like just not as much time as since my early 20s when I was really obsessively listening. And then this week I was pretty obsessively listening, and I just was a little surprised that it was like a bit of a slog sometimes. In my early 20s, I was with them. I was like, all right, let's go through this very dark, droney, like inner turmoil. All right, that's slowly bleed out over 10 minutes. And I was just a little less willing to like be there, and found myself checking the time here and there. But I still think it's like just an incredible album. So why is it then, since we were all a little bit like, I don't want to say disappointed, but not as blown away maybe as we once were, why is it that this album's reputation seems to keep growing? Like if you look at Rate Your Music, you can look at a little chart that shows like each year since I guess they started tracking this. I don't know when it was, like 2006 or 7 or something. Maybe that's when the site started, but it's a little chart. It keeps going up every year. Just every year. This is one of the few albums. It's fun to look at like Kanye and Jay-Z's Watch the Throne, an album that was so hyped at the time and people just don't really listen to it that much anymore. And you can see like this huge drop off. So why is it that this one keeps growing in estimation?
Because I think like, if I was 20 something now and found it, like I might have liked it more. And I could see why like somebody would find this record and be in the headspace or whatever and really come to love it and stuff like you guys did when you were younger and all. And I mean, even just the bedroom musician thing, I think, has grown exponentially because of the computer and the ease and everything. And so, it's, I definitely get, and like I said, I mean, the production on this is 100% my favorite part of it. And I could see why it would like be inspirational and everything. So it honestly doesn't surprise me that it keeps growing. It doesn't really have like a dated sort of feel to it or anything like some of the other stuff we've like talked about. That we've come. What was it? Good News for people who love bad news. Like that was like a record we all kind of thought was really good, and then when we listened to it again, and it really sort of like, when you dust off the nostalgia of it, it's not quite as like great as you once thought it was. And I don't feel like that this record is like that. I mean, it like we say, the lyrics aren't like corny or like anything like that. I think I understand why it grows.
Yeah, what do you think, Darren? And also that question, I guess I should ask about the premise, but it's like, it seems to me that a lot of the stuff that's in the microphones world, the indie folk, the lo-fi, has not like held up that well, you know. Maybe it'll come back in style, but right now it just seems like a little like that was an era and it's quite a far way away. So do you agree with that? And do you think that this sounds dated? And, you know, why doesn't it? Why does it keep growing in estimation?
Yeah, I don't think it sounds dated. I would agree that some other attempts do come across a bit more dated. Why not this one? You know, I agree with you that this really is kind of like a classic. Like, this is a lo-fi, like the standard almost, of which all other lo-fi albums have to be compared to, at least, you know. And there's, you know, I feel like there's so much here that gives reason to, or, you know, justifies it, I guess I should say, right? And just like I was sort of describing before, that feeling of like being inspired to want to write, or, you know, feeling like you could do this too, only to realize that it's very difficult, you know, then makes you realize even more like how much of a genius this guy is, and like this, how much more of a masterpiece that this is, that all other albums, not all, but maybe a lot, are sort of just chasing after, like trying to attempt to get there. Yeah. And so, to Dan's point about, you know, people coming up now and having access to be able to record music and stuff, I mean, I could totally see people finding this and feeling the same way that I felt back then, and even felt today. Like, I could pick up a guitar and like try to do this. Like, it's just that good, yeah. But it also seems that accessible to want to do that. So I'm not surprised to see that its stock is continuing to rise.
Here's a hot take that just popped into my head, and let me see what you guys think, okay? This album is the Loveless of lo-fi. It's not the first lo-fi, certainly. You know, you know how like a lot of shoegaze kind of sounds kind of dated. It was like really an era there, and you know, My Bloody Valentine kind of just like killed the genre by just like doing it better than anybody else. And I just almost feel like this kind of just does almost everything you could hope to do with the lo-fi genre. And yeah, there's a lot that it's inspired. There's a lot of cool stuff in its wake and everything that it kind of, you know, but you could never do this again, I feel like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
That's a hot take. I mean, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. And also on that note, you know, I was kind of wondering, you know, it's weird and very like dramatic in the way that Phil Elverum is, that he, after this album, he does an album called Mount Erie as the Microphones, and it's almost like a continuation. It's even like more grand and like absolutely stunning album. And then he, I guess I didn't even know this, he goes to a cave in Norway. He mentions this on the new song Microphones in 2020. Writes the microphones on a piece of paper and burns it ritually, and then becomes Mount Erie from then on. And so it's like,
I'm glad he explained himself.
it's always been a little strange to me, like why he just gave up the microphones, like why. But he's been Mount Erie ever since, until now, briefly. But you know, do you think that adds to like the classicness here? Like it's almost cheating, because it's like In the Airplane Over the Sea, where there's no more to listen to. So it's like always got that kind of like masterpiece mic drop quality. Did he get away with doing that just by changing his name with the Microphones?
I think a little bit. I've always said, if like, you know, as much as I love Nutrimilk Hotel, I really do hope there isn't ever a new Nutrimilk Hotel record, because it'll never live up. It can only be a disappointment. And I've always said that if Jeff's gonna release another record, like either pick another name, do it as like a solo name or something, because then, like this, you know, you could be like, you know, it's not Nutrimilk, you know, it's just whatever. Right. You know, you could sort of explain it away easier if it sucks, or even if it's like just okay, or you know, pretty good. And so yeah, I think he sort of gets away with it here a little bit. You know, I'm not faulting him for it. I think it cheapens it a little bit to come back and do a record like he did, you know, Microphones in 2020. I you know, coming back, cheapens it.
But I mean, before we get into that new album, I mean, what do you think about that first question, Darren? Like, do you think that he pulled off like sort of mythic status by retiring the name, shortly after this, and that's part of the reason why it's such a all-time classic?
I mean, I think he did. Like I sort of have always looked at Mount Erie as being so different for some reason than the Microphones. I think we spent a lot of time talking about that when we talked about some of his recent records. But like really you could just refer back to like maybe the sound of his voice, but it just seems like two different eras, two different bands, two different people almost. It's kind of crazy, but I think also the fact that it has been a long time. I mean, he very easily could have come back to the Microphones during these last 17 years, but he did not. Like, it seemed like a pretty, it seemed pretty decisive. And then he did this year, which we'll get into that. But I mean, I think he pulled it off, honestly.
Yeah, I just think it's like really remarkable and like clever in a weird way. And I do think that he's self-conscious about this, that like he sort of recognized that he had accomplished something great with the Glow Part 2 and the Mount Erie album, and that he like had to hang it up or something for them to become classics. If he made like just a string of Microphones records after that were like kind of lesser Glow Part 2s, it would have been, right, I think, really damaging to this record, but it feels special. So, that being said, did you guys, sounds like you guys did get a chance to kind of check out Microphones in 2020. I weirdly like listened to it a lot this week.
Yeah, I didn't listen to it a ton because I didn't want to confuse myself with the first record, but I did check it out, yeah.
Yeah, what about you, Darren?
Yep, I did listen to it, and I'm certainly glad I did.
Really? Why do you say that?
Well, so here's what I expected. Going into this, right, a 44-minute track. I was sort of thinking that we would just be revisiting, the Glow Part 2 or some sort of like weird, I was just thinking that it was going to be more of that or something,
Yeah.
But it turned out to be like a total like biographical like explanation for why the Microphones existed, why he ended it, and why he, how he felt, what he was literally doing. Like, so there was, and he does that a lot on some of those previous Mount Erie records, right? It's very like biographical and exactly like, here is literally what I did. I was listening to this song, watching this artist, you know what I mean? And I was just kind of blown away by that approach. Like, and I almost think like calling it Microphones in 2020 is kind of a perfect title for what he does here.
Yeah, because it's kind of like adding this distance to it.
Sure.
Really,
yeah.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it should be called like Mount Erie describes the Microphones.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah,
and I feel like he's not even pretending that it's anything other than that. Like, because it's just that title, like you said, it's like so matter of fact. It's just like. It just adds like a sort of irony to it where it's like he's just talking about the Microphone. So to me, it doesn't like tarnish the Microphone's legacy at all, because there is that distance, and it's so literally about making the Glow Part 2 and like why he decided to change names and stuff. And I will say that, so he's made this album about as difficult to listen to as possible, because he's opposed to streaming, which I understand. But it's also one single 45-minute track.
Hard to get a lot of streams for 45-minute track.
That's true. That's true. He was like, why even bother? And it also, I think most importantly, starts with like 8 minutes of just two chords back and forth. So
right.
There were several times where I put this on and I would like get, like 4 minutes into it. I'd be like, you know what? I'm not going to make it all the way through this right now, so I will stop. And it just kind of forces you. It's like this like long intro. It just forces you to be like, you're either in it for 45 straight minutes or you're not listening at all. So it feels intentional to me, but it is quite a journey, I think. I mean, it's almost like it's just these two chords back and forth the whole song, but in post, he sometimes removes the strums and replaces it with like this kind of droney distortion, sometimes like quite beautiful, like kind of looping, like organy soundscapes and stuff. It switches to like kind of more like a breakdown with like more gentle strums and stuff like that at points, but it's kind of like just this pulse is running through the whole thing. I mean, did you find it enjoyable to listen to, Dan?
Yeah, I liked it. You know, I think he should have used the artist name Mount Erie and called it Microphones in 2020. Yeah, I think that would have been cool. One, because there's a Microphones album called Mount Erie. You know,
yeah, that's true.
You know, that's my nitpick on it, but I did like the record or song or whatever you want to call it. You know, I mean, I think it's cool to like, you know, make a 44-minute track, and I liked the you know, that super long intro, because you know it sort of, you're right, it like forces you to be like, you're in this, or you know, or get out now kind of thing, which I liked. And you know, really, like I mean, I think the Sun Kill Moon like comparison is kind of obvious, but I think he like did it in like a really interesting way, like whereas like the last couple Sun Kill Moon, you know, records have gotten like kind of, you know what you get, and it's kind of the same old thing, and it's frankly gotten like kind of boring. Whereas like this, I don't know, he like did it in a way that was like interesting. The story, even though like, you know, I wasn't like a huge fan of the Microphones or anything, but it was still like an interesting story, especially like the part about him like naming it Microphones because he literally likes microphones and all, you know, like I mean, that was cool, and you know, stuff I can relate to or whatever. And like, you know, it was like a story interestingly told enough that we're like, a person like me who kind of didn't really care, like, you know, I was in and paid attention and enjoyed it. I'll probably like, you know, listen to it you know, more throughout the rest of the year and everything. I did enjoy it. Yeah.
Did you find yourself getting Rough and Rowdy Ways vibes from this, particularly like Murder Most Foul vibes, because it's very like self-reflective about his own career, and you know, the way Murder Most Foul ended with like a, hey DJ, play Murder Most Foul, you know, this ends with like, I think I'll call this record 20, you know, Microphones in 2020. Like it was very, I thought it was like almost bizarre that these two albums came out so close to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think of that at the time, but yeah, that makes sense. I wonder when he recorded it, if maybe, you know, he got a little idea.
Here we go.
I don't know how recent it was.
Did you like this record? Love this record, Darren?
I really liked it. I think I'm going to come back and keep listening to it. It was really cool to be listening to The Glow Part 2 so much, and then to come to this and realize that, you know, he's giving you all sorts of like insight to, you know, what he was doing at the time, what he was thinking. And it's different than The Glow Part 2 in that he's so much more literal here. Like here, it's like you're really down to the earth, knowing exactly what he's, you know, trying to say. And then, you know, it's fascinating because he does call out that he's like split his life into two different eras. You know, he deliberately tells you that, like, as far as the Microphones are concerned, he's like still the same. Like, it hasn't really changed. He doesn't really have any sort of answers. I
like that he's not like dismissive of the stuff that he's probably embarrassed, you know, in some way about like how open he is on that record, but he's like just kind of owning it.
Yeah, and it's just such a brilliant way to like do that, you know, just to have already gone through and created these two different eras, and then to have the ability to reflect on it in a way that, you know, in a song, it's just really seems really creative, you know? Yeah,
I thought that was really, really creative, really inventive, just really clever. You know, the way I felt about it is I did really, really like it. For some reason, I just love his use of distortion on The Glow Part 2, but also like on the, you know, there's a song called Distortion on that now only Mount Erie record. And I love those passages on this part. You know, I'm always kind of like, you know, it gets down to just the guitar strumming and I'm like, all right, this is fine. And then you get the like, you know, with like the beat comes in and like the distortion like kind of is droning underneath and stuff. I'm like, oh, this is just so fucking great. I guess I'm a little disappointed the way that it just kind of ends, like it just like ends. Like it's just like he says one last thing and it's just over. And it was so epic or something. It just feels like it deserved like some kind of send off. But I should mention that it's currently on Radio Music, the top rated album of 2020. Finally, something dethroned Fiona Apple, which is ironic, I think, because we talked about on the Fiona Apple episode how all the stuff she was getting praised for, like the creative recording at home stuff. I just feel like Phil Elverum did it, 20 years ago, and better. But not to knock it, it's a good album. But yeah, and it's actually, it was ahead of the Glow Part 2 for quite a while, but it's finally sunk down. It's just like a few tenths of a decimal point below the Glow Part 2 now. Do you feel like there's maybe a little overhyping at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are always sort of like reactionary, like especially with a band like that, even though he's released albums, like still like using that name, you've always got like people are excited.
Yeah.
You get that excitement coming, and I think it'll chill out. I think like the Glow Part 2 has like a legacy, more built up that'll sustain it. I think this will, I think it'll definitely stay like one of the higher, records this year, which isn't hard to do. I see the third one is Run the Jewels 4.
It's been a weak year.
Yeah, it's been a weak year. So, I mean, it'll definitely, I think, stay up near the top. And I mean, I think it'll keep a good score. But I don't, like it'll stay bolded, but I don't think it's right now it's at a 4.05. I don't know that it'll stay like that high,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that this record is at all worthy to somebody who has never listened to the Microphones? You know what I mean? Like, it really feels like if you don't have any idea, then I don't know if you're going to get much out of it,
Yeah, I don't really think
true.
so. And I feel like if you're going to get into the world of Phil Elverum, this is like probably one of the last records you should. Yeah. Like there are quite a few better to start with and work your way through. But I don't know. It's really clever and it's really cool. It just feels like a little fan thing. Like, hey fans, I see you, enjoy this. Right. And I definitely do. Any closing thoughts? I'm glad we finally got to this record. I've been trying for a long time, Lord knows.
Yeah, no, I mean it was fun. I'm glad I finally dug into it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I said quite a bit. I still adore that record. I think this Microphones in 2020 is just, probably the coolest thing you can do when it comes to, like, I guess, sort of reuniting, which is just reuniting himself, I guess. But yeah, overall, loved it.
When are we going to get AC/DC in 2020?
Oh, I can't wait.
They're working on an album, actually.
God, of course they are.
Working on one.
Maybe it'll be like a 45-minute self-reflective kind of about the history of the band.
About all the times they sung about rocking.
Yeah. Then we rocked here. Then we
Then we made that song about big balls.
Yeah, that would be really great.
Well, I look forward to reviewing that. What do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. You can email us popshieldpod@gmail.com. Of course, next episode, not sure. If you love the show, help us out, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all that junk @popshieldpod, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.